Ethereal Horror Fest. Have you guys been having a good weekend so far? All right. See, that's much better. That's much better. See, I feel like now I could actually cast you in a horror film. Before, not so much. Now you've nailed it. Something that I love about doing horror festivals is just discovering out of a lot of different genre, and I've been fortunate to talk at a lot of different kind of conventions and festivals and whatnot. But the horror nerds, my horror nerds are really the people that I love, because I feel like there's such creativity, there's such ingenuity, there's such so much happening, that originality that just blows me away. And it's funny, just today and even last night, I was walking through, and there'd be times where I'd just be like either going to the bar or going to the bathroom or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I just got to pass through really quickly. And then I see something on the screen being projected, and I see everybody kind of like enthralled and watching the movie, and I myself, even though I was not intending to, get sucked in, and then I too start watching the films, and I just find that just such an exciting experience of like, when you're not even trying to see the films, you get sucked into the films. So, which is why I'm excited to have this industry panel here and talk to some excellent filmmakers and creators. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Aaron Sagers. I currently can be seen on Paranormal Caught on Camera on Travel Channel and Discovery Plus, and that is 5 seasons in. And I also have a Netflix show called 28 Days Haunted that I host. And I also do a Talking Strange live stream show and podcast. And I am really just a nerd all around for spooky shit and horror shit and all sorts of good stuff. And I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I encourage you guys to ask questions of these fine people. So first off, I just met him on the party bus, but I am familiar with his work. He's a director of Creeper and Monsters Are Real. Make some noise for Ron Huffstutter.
Oh, thank you. So you know Creeper. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
I also know Ron because he gave me a shirtless hug earlier today, so...
Oh, absolutely. We needed something to, stand out for the film.
Normally I would say your work precedes you, but after that shirtless hug, I think that precedes you. And also, you know him for Mercy Black and Bloodfest. He's a screenwriter. He's also a local boy. Make some noise for Owen Egerton. Owen, thanks so much for joining us today. Yeah. And coming at us from Los Angeles through the power of technology and Zoom, you know her for A Place Among the Dead and also Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Make some noise, a lot of noise for Juliet Landau. Juliet has entered the chat. There she is. All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with us for a little bit of time. And I guess my first question for each of you is, I want to get a gauge. I want to get a sense of your horror origins, your horror DNA. So what was like the first horror movie that you recall seeing, maybe even one that you weren't even supposed to see, the peeking around the corner when you're supposed to be in bed? What was that first movie? Ron, why don't you begin?
The Prince of Tides.
All right. Solid one. Okay.
No, on a serious note, I'm more a Hellraiser, Clive Barker, man. He's the fucking man. Evil Dead 2, big Bruce Campbell guy.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about The Thing. Anything John Carpenter is fantastic. You want to get into some weird stuff like demons or... there's a lot of influences. I kind of run different categories. I like drama.
Well, we'll get into influences in a second. It's just your early movies is what I want to know about. But, hey, and also let's give it up for The Thing, John Carpenter's Thing, celebrating 40 years, 40th anniversary.
Somehow I knew.
Were it not for E.T., that little bastard, The Thing would have been a commercial success. Owen, how about you? What was the very first movie that you recall kind of peeking around the corner or whatever?
So there's a couple early ones. Like my parents took me to see The Exorcist 2 when I was like 6, which definitely sticks in my head. And I remember them watching The Shining at home, and they're like, "It's not scary. It's just a hotel." But the real one was like at some point, like around 5th grade, 4th grade or something, everyone else was asleep, and late night TV, the Night of the Living Dead came on. And Night of the Living Dead, I was like, what? It's black and white. It's not scary. It's kind of cheesy. It scared the shit out of me when the daughter comes back to life in the basement, and I was like, terrified me. And then to make it extra creepy, we were staying at this little cabin, and my parents had had a lot of wine and gone to bed early, and the moaning that I'd heard in the movie continued after. I was sleeping on the couch. I'm like, it's just in my head. I'm like, no, that's my parents. So there's a lot of stuff wrapped up. I haven't seen a therapist yet.
I feel like based on just 30 seconds of you speaking, you really need a good therapist.
Yeah.
There's already a lot to unpack based on what you said.
That could kill my career. I need my disturbed psyche.
Did your parents make love too?
It wasn't making love. It was just fucking.
I really thought the most unsettling part of that story was going to be you seeing The Exorcist 2 at too young of an age. But then you were like, no, that was the appetizer. Here's the main dish. Juliet, I hate that you have to follow that story. But what was the very first movie, the scary movie that you recall seeing?
It was actually Psycho, and I, too, was around 5 years old, and my dad, who did many things that were not appropriate, he actually said, I have worked with Hitchcock, and you need to see this movie. It's a classic. And he sat me down in front of the TV, and we proceeded to watch Psycho, and I was so terrified. I literally was like apoplectic with fear. And the funny part about that is for years afterwards, I actually thought that classic meant horror. So an Audrey Hepburn movie would come on, like Roman Holiday, and my parents would say, oh, you need to see this. It's a classic. And I would just bound out of the room in complete terror. It wasn't until in my 20s I was like, oh my God, all these movies that are classics are I need to catch up with. They're not terrifying.
Right. I actually, like, Owen, I like your Night of the Living Dead. Well, not the parents banging element of it, but no offense. I mean, I want your folks to bang. But I relate to that simply because I saw Night of the Living Dead at a very young age as well, and I think there was this hubris going into it that it was like, well, it's a black and white movie, it's an old movie, like certainly this thing is not going to get to me. And then it sat with me and it disturbed me, and it was like, it really like, it scared me at an early age more than I expected it to, you know?
I mean, the thing is like what Juliet was saying, like with Psycho too, Night of the Living Dead still scares me. The shower scene, just the shower scene alone still scares me. There is a sort of hubris, right? You're like, we're so mature now. You know, like we've seen war on television. We can handle this. But man, those moments.
Both, I mean, I think, Owen, both you and Juliet, like my mom, I'm going to pass this story along to her because her parents were horror film fans. She was born in 1949. And so her parents were fans of early horror, and they took her to see Psycho at far too young of an age. And for a very long time, she would tell me like she basically could not take a shower if she was the only one alone in a home. So, hey, yay, horror, and parents that can be bad parents.
Inappropriate parenting. I want to say that I got in trouble in 2nd grade because I was reading Stephen King's Misery. And I graduated from Goosebumps probably from like kindergarten or 1st grade and just read almost the entire catalog of Stephen King. He keeps coming out with stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's got like 5 books out this year at least, you know, so I'm always catching up.
Never heard of him. But, I like to support indie writers and authors. The next thing I want to know is, so that was like your first early recollections of horror, but I'm curious to know, when did it start to gel for you as an art form or as something that you started seeing beyond the scares, something as substance, where you're like, okay, there's some. It's not just blood and guts. There's also meat to this, you know? When was that moment where you started appreciating horror a little bit more? You want to begin?
Just living life and meeting people. I think that was the most horrifying thing ever, is actually like being in society, and being a grown-up is probably the most fucking terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. And, you know, like the film that I have in, you know, Monsters Are Real, tunnel13films.com. I just want to, you know, pump that real quick.
Yeah.
Thanks for that mercy clap. That was amazing. But yeah, it's not a monster. It's not a Freddy Krueger. It's not a Jason. It's a human being.
Right.
And human beings are the most scariest fucking people on earth. And that's what, oh, give me money. I will make a monster film. No worries. Give me a budget. I will make a creature. But for now, we can keep it human. And human is the scariest thing ever.
All right. But I like that you brought it down to that level of like humans are scary. It's true though. I agree with that. Yeah, Owen.
Yeah, I think it was like, so when I was like 15 or so, I watched, maybe 16, I watched Halloween 4. It's a weird one when you're like, what taught you about the elevated nature of horror? It's like, Halloween 4? But I love Halloween 4. I adore Halloween 4. And it struck me in a way that it never had. And I think and I got deep into horror after that, which is weird. But the reason I think is like, I don't know, there's a time in your life when you realize you're going to die. You know, and no one told you that before. I mean, you saw people die, but they always died because they did something wrong or they're a bad guy. But then you saw like normal people who hadn't done anything wrong, and they died, often in horrible ways, which is exactly what life is. And I started realizing as I was watching in the 80s, all those Halloween 4, all the Friday the 13th sequels, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Death is walking after me. Doesn't even have to run. I can run and hide and do anything, but death, whether it's Jason, Michael, or whatever, is going to be faster than me and be in front of me at some point. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to die, so I better get off the couch and do something. And that's when I realized, oh, this is teaching me what it is to be alive. All this death, all this gore, all this fun, all these thrills is really teaching me like, oh, I better be alive because there's no other end to this story than me dying.
All right. Wow.
Damn.
I do like that. I like that insight because it actually. So I was an '80s kid, so my movie monsters. I mean, I loved the Universal monsters, but my movie monsters, my generational monsters, were Freddy and Jason. And yes, Halloween predated that a little bit. But then I eventually started loving Michael Myers because the shape is just constantly coming after you, taking its time. You're running out of time. It's taking its time.
Yeah.
And that kind of existential dread is just so spot on. So I definitely appreciate that. Juliet, for you, what was the moment where you realized that horror is an art form and not just about the cheap thrills?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I wanted to echo something that Ron said in terms of we just interviewed Tim Burton for another project of ours, and I'd worked with Tim prior, and he said very similarly that he is much more scared of real life than monster movies. For me, I really think it was working on Buffy. And, Buffy was such a great, the metaphor being high school is a nightmare.
Sure.
I started to really realize the power of how genre can explore things. You can go places in genre that can't, in the same way that it gets in people's sort of tissues and under your skin, literally. And with the film that we have here at the festival, we use genre to explore the repercussions of growing up under the sway of narcissism and psychological abuse. And I don't think we would have the powerful response we've been having if it was, a straight drama or any other different kind of film, because I think it allows us to really turn the lens on ourselves in a way that it goes into the subconscious and goes into all the deep recesses of who we are.
Yeah. I mean, and another kind of paraphrasing a Tim Burton quote is, it's normal people that scare me, and And I very much relate to that as well. It's like the people that are not in touch with their monsters, not in touch with their quirks, those are the people that freak me out. Those are the people that I'm like, oh, you're the entirely normal person? Yeah, you probably got a dungeon in your basement, you know? Like, that's what freaks me out.
I don't know how to relate to you, right? I don't know how.
Yeah. So in 2022, what would you say is the state of horror, and what trends are you seeing? What excites you? Because clearly we are seeing, and actually even early on in the global pandemic lockdown, we were seeing creators turn out projects that were reflective of the time in which we were in. So now that we're also seeing the studio reflecting that, the studios reflecting that, just overall, what would you say is the current state of horror in 2022, and what trends are you seeing? Juliet, I'm going to stick with you for that one.
Well, one of the things that I find most exciting, I'm so excited to be a part of this festival and get to see all these amazing filmmakers work. I mean, it's so wonderful to get to see stuff that isn't necessarily cookie cutter, that is unusual and exploring things in a different way. And that one of the things of getting to participate here is how much you get to connect with other like-minded creative people. So to me, that's one of the things that's so exciting about being here and participating in this. And I don't know, I think also probably Elizabeth and all of the team on the festival would be able to have a better overview of sort of the landscape, having seen a lot of the films that are coming in. But I think it's a really exciting time, really for all types of genres, and especially horror, because we've been living through a real nightmare, and people have been needing to express that, whether it's literally about the pandemic or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I appreciate that. Owen, what's your thought on that?
I totally echo that. I think we're living in a fucking golden age of horror right now. I would call it the third golden age of Western horror, but the universal horror of the 1930s, also during a depression in between two world wars, pretty shitty time. And then the second one being the 1970s, right? Vietnam, really hard time, racial strife, like pretty fucking hard time. And then right now we're seeing great stuff. And I think Juliet's right. There's a great writer, Scott Poole, who just came out with a new book about horror, but his book Wasteland talks about all of horror in the modern sense of it. All comes from basically the trauma coming from World War I, and basically reaction against the rise of fascism, which we're fucking seeing all the way around us.
Which we're seeing everywhere.
Yeah. And so we as a culture right now, you know what we need? We need to work through all this stuff, from Trump to pandemic to abuse to minorities to gays, everything is happening right now, transphobia, all these different things. And the way we do it is we have nightmares. And the way we do nightmares as a culture is we make films, and we put our nightmares on the screen, and then we get into a room in the dark and we have that nightmare together. And that's what's happening now. And that's going to give us some brilliant art, not just because people need to work it out, but because we so need it. We're so hungry for it. And at the same time, what's wonderful is it's cheaper to make a horror movie than ever. And that's great, because right now you go to the movieplex and the $1 billion superhero movie is gonna tank, and Smile or Terrifier 2 is gonna win the day, because horror fans fucking know what's up. And we don't need a huge budget or a big movie star, we just need a story that thrills us. And that's super exciting. So for horror fans, never been a better time to be alive.
It's an interesting time, because like what I'm fascinated by is like, look, I love the $200 million superhero movies as well. I'll show up and watch those as well. But what I love about horror in particular is that not only will they show up into the cinemas and watch Terrifier 2, but there's so many content streams, and I hate the word content, but there's so many streams where people can latch onto these films and connect wherever they want to see it, and and that's exciting. But I most certainly agree. From kind of the spooky standpoint, the paranormal standpoint, is we see interest in the afterlife and paranormal and things like in the supernatural after these big moments of trauma, whether it's the Civil War, World War I, 9/11, and I feel like we're kind of entering in this other wave of it, not even truly post-pandemic, but still pandemic and still political strife and division, and that as scary as it can be for us as a people, it gives us a lot of fodder and chum in the water for creators.
Aaron, do you feel that when that happens, like that in those historical moments when people like are hungry for the paranormal and hungry for the supernatural, that is it a desire to remystify the world, to like add that back into the world?
I think it serves a couple different purposes. A lot of times in those waves that follows like those traumatic events, it's trying to find meaning in the world. It's trying to tap into this notion that this is all kind of worthwhile, but also there's something more out there, and give context to the very human horrors that we are experiencing. I mean,
can I go to the opposite part of this?
Please.
I want to see some horror movies that like have no precedence in anything. It's just straight slashers or something crazy. I feel like everything has an agenda right now, and it shouldn't be an agenda. Horror is a fun category. Horror is comedy. Horror is gruesome. Horror is just like an escape. And I love that. And I love the psychological, the really good ones. I'm not taking away from that. But I really want to see the industry just like stop getting up their own ass and just like make really good fucking films, because they're really good fucking films. And I feel like for now, everything has an agenda. Everything is this and that. And I haven't seen the new Halloween. I haven't seen the new Hellraiser. I've been on, vacation or whatever the fuck this is, like working for the last 3 weeks. But I want to see just everybody stop talking about politics, stop talking about social issues, and just make good films.
I'm sorry. I don't think you can. That's ridiculous. If you think you can make a piece of art and you're not making a comment about life or the culture that you live in, you're blind. So when we had Halloween, and then every movie from the Halloween on, we had a thing where in America, we had believed that we had made safe space where people could not get you. And then the horror movies came in without even trying to. I don't think Carpenter and Deborah Hill were trying to say this, but they said, suburbia is safe. We thought that from the 1950s on. And then they said, well, let's make Halloween where a child of suburbia comes back to suburbia and destroys suburbia. Yeah. But that's okay. That's okay. Summer camp is safe. Summer camp is safe.
Yeah,
that's okay. Our dreams are safe. Our dreams are safe.
But what's the political agenda of John Carpenter's The Thing? It's just a good movie.
But it's about paranoia. It's about not trusting your neighbor.
That's awesome. So that's the kind of stuff we don't want to get back to.
It's about paranoia and not trusting, and that anybody could be the demon. I actually think that it is really clear what it's saying.
I kind of so I see what you're saying, and I don't want to dismiss that, because I think when creators, if you start from, I have this idea and I want to tell just a rad story, or I want to tell about the stuff that scares me, or I want to talk about that, if you're starting from that place of purity, you can really do something interesting. If you set out with, pardon me, I'm going to tell a quote-unquote political story, if that's your agenda, I think that's where you can get in the weeds a little bit.
Exactly. I want to tell human stories. I want to tell human stories about humans and not about politics. And that's really kind of how I feel about what's going on right now.
So let me throw this to Juliet, and then I want to get some questions from the audience, because Juliet, your story, your movie is very much there's a
politicians are not humans.
Are they? Frankly, I'm willing to welcome our reptilian overlords after seeing some of the folks in Congress. But Juliet, did you set out to tell I wouldn't say it's political, but it's very personal. You're telling a story that's reflective about, your childhood, your upbringing, and you're doing it through the gaze of horror, and it fits very well because you're talking about PTSD, you're talking about abuse, you're talking about, a troubled childhood. So what was the origin point for your film? Was it, I want to tell about my childhood and then make it a horror, or was it, I want to make a horror and then tell about my childhood?
Well, it was really about telling a story that I felt like, my husband and I co-wrote and co-produced the movie, and we both come from a similar background in terms of having been raised by narcissistic parents and having dealt with narcissistic abuse and psychological abuse. And we felt like that there wasn't a movie that really reflected the repercussions of that, how it affects you in your life after that in terms of your decision making destructive choices. So the reason, we decided to use genre for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, and most importantly, we wanted to make an entertaining movie. We wanted to make something that people wanted to come to. We also wanted to use a genre that people feel safe and comfortable with, and tropes that they feel safe and comfortable with, as a way to talk about things that aren't safe and aren't comfortable. It was also, in a way to sort of lull the audience into a sense of safety to go somewhere not particularly safe. Also because, the movie is entirely scripted, but it's scripted as a meld of fact, fiction, and the fantastical. So all of our, known actors play alter ego versions of themselves, and all of the interview sections are scripted to hopefully look completely spontaneous. But each of them, including myself, has ties to genre and vampire material in particular. And ultimately, we felt like the vampire was the perfect metaphor for the ultimate narcissist. I mean, it's a being which drains all for its own needs. It is, often they mesmerize and have people in their thrall. Narcissists are often incredibly charismatic. You have to invite a vampire in. In our story, we're looking at, the familial, the family unit. You don't invite those people in, but then you're primed to invite others of that ilk into your life. Vampires do not change. They stay the same. Narcissists do not change. Vampires see no see no reflection in the mirror. Narcissists have zero capacity for self-reflection. So it was almost like a no-brainer. And with, my experience on Buffy, I just was like, I feel like this is the perfect way to tell this story, and also to get for people to get involved and have an entertaining experience.
Yeah, and something I personally just love about the vampire genre, or vampire as a monster, is that it's constantly reinvented for the times, and we can kind of place our own cultural perspective and context on it. So it's always worth looking at through a modern lens. That said, I do want to take some questions from the audience if people have some. The question is, what is our take on A24 horror? And I guess when you say A24 horror, you're also talking about what's called very elevated horror. Yes, the term that's been introduced in recent years. So who wants to tackle that first? Ron, his mic is close to his mouth. Ron is ready at the gun. Let's go.
I was at South by Southwest, and I partied with some of those guys, and they're pretty cool. The actual films, there's some great films that are coming out of A24. I'm not going to suck their dick or anything like that, but there's some great stuff that's happening there, and I feel like that's elevating the horror community, right now.
So is that the quote that we should use for you when we eventually write this up?
Absolutely. I am not sucking their dick. Okay. But they are fantastic people. And that will be 100% the quote. But no, they make great films. How are we gonna criticize anyone that's making great horror films?
Okay.
And doing I don't know. Is that the question?
Well, for the record, I just want to say I gave Ron the option of backing out of that quote, and he.
No, I'm gonna
It's
heads down. I'm gonna go like a dolphin. It's gonna be there.
Owen, you want to weigh in on that?
I would suck the dick of A24. Start with that. So I think, I hate the term elevated horror because what elevated horror is a way for people who don't like horror to say, I like this movie that's a horror movie, but I can't confess that it's horror, so I'll call it elevated horror. But they just mean they fucking like it. And, A24, Hereditary, Midsommar, and so many of these, I actually think they're doing a brilliant job. They do this wonderful aspect of like, okay, we're going to be more of an art house horror in that kind of way. And it's a genre that I really, really enjoy. I also will put on, Jason X and go into space with Jason.
I love that movie.
Me too. And I'll do it as a double feature. I'm okay with that. I think it's exciting anytime. What we're seeing again and again in today's world, of course, is we're seeing that horror is once again kind of dipping into critical acceptance, whether it's Jordan Peele films or A24 films or whatever. And that's great. And that's not the first time. That happens again and again. And basically horror is able to do this thing that it kind of moves like a whale, kind of going way deep down and getting into the dark, nasty places, the cold places that no one wants to go to, and then dipping up every now and then and showing itself, breathing a little oxygen, then going back down again. So you have like The Exorcist winning Academy Awards, boom, and then horror goes back down again. And you have like Get Out winning an Academy Award, and then it's going to go back down again. And both of these things are necessary. I think actually, as far as horror fans, we should have a balanced diet where we have a really, an artistically done A24 film with a really decent budget and a lot of time. But then we can also have.
Can I jump in on this one too? It's kind of like heavy metal fans. I'm a big heavy metal fan, and they're like, "Oh no, I won't listen to Metallica anymore" or some bullshit. It's like, no, listen to everything. Everything is great. Everything has a piece of something. Everything is fantastic. Enjoy it for what it is and have your favorites. That's fine. But don't diss Metallica because they made Load and Reload.
So, and Juliet, I want to get your take on this, but before I do, I just want to say overall, my perspective on this is that it's really, we have an embarrassment of riches across the board as far as the movies and stuff we want to get into, whether it's, and just within the horror genre, like comic books and movies and TV shows and horror comedies and across the board. We have entire streaming services dedicated to this. So, I feel like we've reached a point, and I also don't think it's going away. We're just more content is going to be coming at us, and it's not going to be leaving. It's not going away. So we've reached the point that it doesn't have to be just horror. Horror may be the tag that you attach to it, the descriptor or whatever, but horror can be, I'm going to tell a heist movie that has a horror element. I'm going to tell a superhero movie, a superhero story that has a horror element to it. I'm going to tell a comedy that has a horror element. And I freaking love all of that. Give it to me. So I love that. And I feel like elevated horror is perhaps a awkward phrasing of saying just better budget and more highbrow storytelling. But I dislike the term. Now, that said, Juliet, I want to hear from you because your movie also, I think, would fit within if you're going to say elevated horror, it would fit within that category if someone wants to tag it so. So what is your take on it?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I agree with you, and I agree. It's interesting. I think Francis Ford Coppola was the one who said that basically, genre was in a way invented. That genre labeling films was really for people to be able to sell them. So it's put into a box so that people can sell it. And really, all great art can be sort of a mix in terms of what you're saying. And I think there's the thing that is exciting in the horror genre is all kinds of storytelling. And that includes art house and art horror and psychological horror and whatever words you want to name it, which again might be the box for selling it, or for, as you were saying, for people to give permission for certain people to say that they actually like it. But I think, some of the horror films that for me, you look at Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now, or you look at Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Those, you could say those are art films, and they're so iconic and beautifully told and terrifying, and Black Swan, horror, psychological horror. I mean, you can, and I think there's room for all kinds of storytelling, and that's the thing that makes it exciting. That there's many facets that can be explored.
I love that you said that, because honestly, like if The Shining, Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby were to come out today, it would be
called
elevated horror, as opposed to, well, it's just a freaking good like horror tale, horror yarn,
Exactly.
And I do understand from a sociological standpoint, there are things that we as humans need to be given permission to like, almost like, and it's not just horror, it is like comic book stuff as well. It's like, well, it's a superhero movie, but it's a good superhero movie. It's elevated horror. It's like, so I understand that if people need the buffer to say like, okay, well, this is why I like it. Cool, that's fine.
Is anybody watching The Walking Dead anymore? Or like, I actually need like an update.
Enough people are. Enough
there's
people
like
are.
5 spinoffs.
Yeah.
And like, I love Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm not trying to like, bust those guys out. I kind of want to move there. But is anybody watching that? Is it still good?
I mean, yes. From a commercial standpoint, yes, people are, in order to justify the 5 spinoffs. Yeah. Like,
okay, yeah.
So
like,
it is.
Everybody left. I don't know. Every time I like jump into it, I'm like, what's happening?
I will say this though. I think Juliet does a really good point, because I know this is the industry panel. So when I'm selling a screenplay, there's a sort of this balance of understanding who I'm selling it to, even before we get to the audience. And there is the certain producers who are like, well, I don't know if I consider myself a horror filmmaker, as producer, and they want to go like, oh, no, this is kind of a horror movie. But overall, I mean, across the board, what's interesting is a damn good story, and enough scares without a damn good story that moves your heart and moves your soul won't work. Jason Blum, when I was making Mercy Black, Jason Blum said, "This is my ingredients to make a good Blumhouse movie." He says, make what would be a Sundance movie, basically, and then add in the scares. But basically, if you're able to take out all the monsters, all the murders, and all the scares, you should have a really decent Sundance drama. And I thought that was like an interesting take on what it means to make a horror movie.
Tell a good story, right?
Tell a good story.
That's ultimately what it's about. And that's not to dog on elevated horror as a label. I will say, like, the recent news where John Carpenter is like, I don't know what elevated horror is. I kind of found that to be a little bit bullshitty, because it was a lot of hot takes from the media saying John Carpenter doesn't know what elevated horror is. No, he just was saying, like, no, I like horror. I like horror movies. Like, tell a good story. I think horror can be used effectively to tell a great story.
They Live is one of the most classic films of all time. John Carpenter. It's fantastic, dude. And like, and if it came out today, nobody would like it. They'd be like, this is cheeseball.
Well,
or this is it's fantastic. I live by that movie, by the way.
Let me bounce around and let me get another question in. Yes, on the back. Let me reframe the question. First off, it was a criticism couched in a compliment. But the question was, how do you approach the setup, the first 10 pages? And Owen, since I was directed to you, why don't you begin?
That's a really, really great question. Just curious, first of all, would anyone buy me a drink? I would love a beer or something. Oh, you already got one? That's what you were pointing at. God bless you.
That's how I know that you're a screenwriter and a filmmaker. Is that please buy me a beer?
Second whiskey and coke.
On the panel, asking for a drink. I just can't go this long.
Owen gets credit for keeping it classy.
Your question is brilliant. How many of you guys are screenwriters or filmmakers? No, applaud. Go ahead and applaud for yourself, because you fucking great, fantastic. In the feature business, the first I'm going to talk about the screenplay and I'm going to talk about the film because I think they're both important in horror. The first 10 pages, the first 5 pages, let me take it back to the first 3 pages are absolutely essential. There's absolutely essential. So the film that I made with Blumhouse actually got to Blumhouse and it made it onto the blacklist. It made it onto the blood list. So these industry lists, it was doing pretty well. And it made it to Blumhouse, and kind of the second guy in command at Blumhouse later told me, he's like, I read your script when I first got here. And I said, yeah. And he's like, I read 2 pages and then I threw it away. And I was like, oh. He goes, luckily, my assistant took it home and read it. And then she told me it's really worth reading. And we called you and bought the script and hired you to direct it. And I was like, well, thank the fuck God. But I was like, from there on, I was like, the fuck God. From now on, I'm going to be working much harder to make my first 3 pages pop wild, because that's when you're catching the producer or the executive's eye. And they have 10 scripts to read that weekend in their hot tub with all their cocaine. So they're going to be looking for an excuse to stop reading and move on to the next one. That's the script. Oh my gosh, I got 2 more beers. Do you want one? This is...
I would whiskey and coke with you.
Well, this is wonderful. This is the best panel I've ever been on.
Oh, you are the best.
The second thing is, though...
I just fell in love.
The second thing is the film. So this is an interesting thing too, because I've actually got a film now that I'm out with a producer, and we're talking with someone and said, like, well, I want to take it to Hulu, but here's the thing that I know that if we don't have an opening that pops, Hulu is terrified that who's ever watching it is going to go to anything on Netflix, anything on Amazon Prime, anything on Shudder. So basically, we're being asked to make something at the beginning that defines the horror that is later to come. So we get what is a classic thing that was done in theater or in movies for so long, but we need to do it even better now, is the classic cold open. So Halloween may be one of the best examples. Halloween opens with a terrifying point of view stalker through the window. The killer, who we don't know who it is, follows the sister upstairs that we don't know the sister, stabs her to death, and then comes outside and it's revealed that it's just a child dressed in a clown outfit, right? All in about 2 minutes. 2 screen pages, right? 2 screenplay pages. And it's terrifying. Now, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill know we can spend about 25 minutes meeting these teenagers with no real kills, finding out who they are, with just a guy hiding in the bushes, because we know what they don't know. We know the horror that they are blindly walking toward. So those first 10 pages are essential. And one last thing I would say on this, and this is kind of important. For everyone you show your screenplay, the most important pages are your first 10 pages. For your film, it's your last 10 minutes. When the film, because that's what people remember when they leave the theaters, the last 10 minutes. So your screenplay, put it all as best you can in those first 10 pages. And when you make the film, put it all as best you can in those last 10 minutes.
I like that you're also, there's a thread there of everything old is new again, or everything old never went away, essentially. Yeah.
I want to go back to the first 10 pages. I have a short that's like 15 minutes in this. So the first 10 pages is pretty much the entire goddamn story. So, yeah, it's very important. And thank you for laughing at that. Nobody else did. I appreciate that. But, yeah, no, you have to have a catch. Like, if you're making a horror film, action film, I mean, I guess you can placate it with a drama a little bit. But you better get my attention the first, like, 10 minutes of the film. And God, look at the next generation.
Yeah.
I mean, they have no. You have to catch them in the first 5-10 minutes of the film. So come out with something hard, and I feel like that's very important to any screenwriter. You know, make it very visible, like what story you're telling, or get a hook. You're a fisherman. Get a hook.
And Julia, why don't you weigh in on that? The first 10 pages.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, obviously you want to make your whole thing an engaging experience, but absolutely. I mean, it's interesting listening to what you're saying, Owen. And I think that, in terms of A Place Among the Dead, our movie that's in the festival, it really does sort of start with a punch in terms of sort of and sets the tone for like, oh, this is what I'm in for. And I think that is an important thing. So you're sort of grabbed and wanting. I mean, it's like any any good writing, any novel, the opening, Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's a great sentence. I'm in, I mean, I think that it absolutely, and of course, the end equally so that you don't go a whole journey and then end up frustrated, like, oh, it was so great, but it actually didn't have a third act that made sense, Yeah.
It's just a shame no one ever talks about Charles Dickens anymore. But do we have another question for you guys had one?
Sorry, maybe that was too elevated.
No.
Yes, he was elevated R. Yeah. Back row. Actually, let me go over here and then I'll move over. Yeah.
It just came into my head. It wasn't the best.
Look.
It was a perfect reference.
It was
fantastic.
a perfect reference, yes. So to rephrase, just for audio, for modern audiences, what do they find frightening and how do you play to that?
If there's something human that you relate to, if you see yourself in a story, then you're engaged, and then you're also it's also scary because you're in whatever the circumstances are that are scary. So I think it's about sort of a mirror that reflects ourselves in some way that we're identifying with in a story. The more, I mean, part of the thing that when you brought up, the movie that we made is personal. I mean, that whole thing of the more personal, the more universal. I actually think that that's true. Like that if you see yourself in something and there's scary circumstances, you're going to be scared to your core.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely worth noting, because if you're authentically telling a story and it's personal, you're going to find out other people latch on to those monsters. Yeah. Everybody shares those monsters in different ways, Mm-hmm. So I definitely, most certainly agree to that. So I guess be authentic, be real is sort of what you're saying as well.
I think so. And true to the story that you're telling me, one of the things that's been amazing with our film is that we've had where the entire audience stays to talk afterwards for 4.5 to 6 hours every time that we have had online screening events. And people talk about the film and then what spoke to them and then about their own lives. I mean, it's been... Yeah. And we really made it to provoke a conversation, but it's been so humbling, and it's been amazing to get to know, like, we have these people that call themselves the A Place Among the Deadheads, like the Grateful Dead, and they come to every, like, a tour, and it's like to have people that say, this movie changed my life, or the conversation that's provoking has been helpful. I mean, that has been such a gift in my life. So I think if, it doesn't have to be the same thing. If I just think if it taps into our own fears, whatever they are, and you relate to it, then you're going to be terrified. You're going to be scared with whatever that is.
Most certainly. Personal is universal. Ron.
Oh, I got the microphone right by my mouth. Juliet, you could not have said it better. It has to be personal to the audience. Like, you have to tell a story that makes sense, and especially now more than ever, the audience isn't stupid, especially in the horror genre. The 1970s, we could just have some slasher flicks and, somebody gets killed, gore, awesome. But, like, we have to have character development. We have to have story. We have to have something to relate to. And I think that's the maturity of horror fans. I don't know.
So, Owen, yeah.
Yeah, I think your question about, like, the subtlety of films in the 1970s and what audiences expect today is a really valid and interesting question. I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, I'd say a jazz analogy.
Which we always like to work into a horror panel.
Yeah.
And I'm glad. I'm sad it took this long.
I don't feel so bad about Dickens now.
We're very learned here.
Yeah. We got the jazz analogy.
So people say that people stopped appreciating Louis Armstrong because they heard too much Charlie Parker. And what they meant by that, Charlie Parker came after Louis Armstrong. He built on Louis Armstrong. He was quoting Louis Armstrong in his music, but people didn't know that. They just knew Charlie Parker. And so when they heard Louis Armstrong, they said, oh, it sounds like a weak Charlie Parker, right? And sometimes modern viewers today are like, I don't know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre seems kind of tame because I've seen all these other movies that have built and expanded on what they started, right? That's one thing. I think the other thing is well, it's kind of an interesting thing. I think it's like, I think it's the uncanny, right? I actually don't think the 1970s films are that subtle.
No.
I mean, I think Halloween has some subtle moments and it builds in a slow burn. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was not subtle, right? It was terrifying in a big way. And I also think those movies, a lot of the movies, including the movies that Juliet was mentioning, have a lot of this stuff that we call character development. They weren't just slashers, right? They weren't. The horror was doing incredible things. The Exorcist won Academy Awards. But the uncanny remains. And what acts and understands as uncanny changes. So when Michael Myers steps out behind a bush in 1978 and we see his white mask and his overalls, that movie felt uncanny. That moment felt uncanny, meaning it didn't fit in, meaning reality was out of whack. It was out of balance. And that felt horrifying and an accurate description of reality. That's why that moment works.
For the first time.
For the first time. Now that's been replicated a billion times. But then you get Jordan Peele's Nope. Not a spoiler here for anyone who hasn't seen it, but Jordan Peele's Nope has a moment that there's a shoe that's balancing, not anyone in the shoe, a shoe balancing on its toe. Do you know the scene I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. That shoe is balancing on its toe, and it's uncanny. It's strange. It upsets us. Still, for me, the most upsetting moment of The Shining, a movie I've seen a billion times, but I saw the movie before I read the novel, is when we see in the end of a hallway a guy in a tuxedo receiving oral sex from a guy in a dog outfit. And we don't know why. We're never told. It's never explained. And so what happens is it's uncanny. But it is, as Juliet was saying, that was a scary thing to somebody. So when we're writing our stories, we don't need to know why something scares us. We don't need to know why this image, this idea, this concept scares the hell out of us. The idea and the knowledge that it scares us, we can rest assured that it will scare somebody else. Yeah. Put those in your stories.
I was a fan of the Muppets, so I just always assumed Rolf the dog had fell on hard times. It was just a bad turn for Rolf.
He really wanted a bone.
It was that's who it was, right?
I
It was
am never
Rolf.
going to see that movie again.
Oh, it was totally
the same...
Rolf. And to tie it all back, Rolf was like a bit of a jazz player, so
he was always late, but he was not late to a blowjob.
Okay, but no, I really appreciate all of these perspectives because yes, it was like the notion of subtlety. A lot of times we're looking at subtlety retrospectively. We're looking at it through a hindsight. You know, Halloween. A lot of these older movies, they're not that subtle. We look now back and say like, oh, okay, that was a little bit subtle. Or the Universal monster movies were like, oh, it was like they didn't show the monster, so that was like really they were pacing it. They were like playing it out, but it was simply budget-wise. So there was a reason that they didn't show the monster until they really could, until that like money shot. It was budgetary reasons, you know. So
yeah, but Aaron, sorry, you were making a point.
Please, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say. So, how many people here have seen Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
What a dumb question. Okay, so name to me, if you were just like, I'm going to choose a visual that I remember from Jurassic Park. Name a visual from that film. The water glass. Who else? Water glass?
The goat. The goat.
Oh, the goat, thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a movie, the biggest movie ever made about dinosaurs ever, right? And the image that has become classic, the image that we remember, the image that is mentioned and sort of referenced and mocked in so many other movies is a glass of water vibrating. So that's subtle. That is our job as screenwriters and filmmakers. Oh, you're touching me? That moment is important too. Chaos.
There's an
chaos.
Ian Malcolm chaos moment.
That moment was sexy. But so our job is to find those subtle moments that play in harmony with a giant T-Rex, eating a lawyer.
But let me push back, and I don't want to like go down this path too much, but we're also talking about a filmmaker that he made that movie, after the shark was broken and he had to rely on subtlety.
Yes.
So like,
Yes.
you know,
He learned
Is
it.
Steven Spielberg like a horror filmmaker? Like,
Yes!
did we like talk about this?
Oh, Jaws
like,
is a horror movie.
fantastic horror filmmaker.
Jaws is a horror
we don't
movie,
talk
yes.
about. We dissed E.T. earlier, but God, that E.T.
I did
is
dis- I
conservative.
did not diss
E.T.
E.T..
E2 could have like did a U-turn.
I freaking
and-
love E.T. I will hold a debate on E.T. versus The Thing all day long. But Juliet, you were about to weigh in on that.
Oh, I was just going to say, in accordance sort of with what Owen was saying, is, side by side in The Exorcist, you have the head spinning around, and you also have part of the thing that's so terrifying is his crisis of faith is equally as scary. The priest having like, am I up to the challenge? Can he actually combat evil? Can he actually do this? And his own religious faith and having doubts. So I think sometimes there's a combination of a subtle and a not subtle side by side within films.
For certain. I mean, Ellen Burstyn, like her character as a mother, like the horror of her is that she is not a believer. She's
Right.
not a religious person, and she's seeking answers from doctors and psychiatrists who fail her, and she's just a mom that's like, what the hell is going on here? Before she realizes it's actually hell. What the actual hell is going on here? But that real like horror of a mom is so quiet and understated in that film compared to what happens eventually. And then there's also the crisis of faith. Most certainly. It's these quiet moments that land so effectively. And we may think about the head spinning and the pea soup and whatnot, but these other moments are what lay the groundwork for what we eventually think about.
Priests are really scary.
I was raised Catholic and I was an altar boy, so...
Me too, sir. Me too. 100%.
Also, no, I wasn't, because I talk too much. That said, we are running out of time, but let me get some other questions. Okay, yes, great questions. Horror tropes that you're sick of seeing. Try to avoid in your own writing, but also I will go one step further and say any horror tropes that you would happily retire. Who wants to jump in on that?
God damn it. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to have to say it. Zombies, vampires. Fucking, I want more werewolves. More werewolves. We're not werewolves, we're swearwolves. Yeah, I need more werewolves in my life.
I don't know. I don't know, man. I love werewolves, but
And
I also...
Juliet, I love you, and I know you kick ass in this. And people do make good, fucking fantastic vampire movies and stuff like that. But there are so many people making shitty, like...
Give me more vampires.
versions
Give me
of
more
it.
zombies.
Of,
Give me, I love
there's
it.
no-
Like,
I don't know, Twilight. I need blood, guts. I want ugly vampires.
but
I want the most ugly, fucking hairy, disgusting fucking vampires I've ever seen, and they just come out like Peter and What We Do in the Shadows. I'm Peter. Like I need Nosferatu. I need like that kind of vampire. Fuck this sexy shit, dude. Fuck this sexy shit. Horror isn't sexy.
I see. I like
Unless
the I like the deceiver. I like the ultimate deceiver, which a vampire can be. I like the otherness of a zombie. So while I do not dismiss what you're saying, man, give me more vampires. Give me more zombies. I love it. I love anything that's playing off of like what we think is a human.
Well,
that
there's
is
so many more. Where's the mermaids? Where's the werewolves?
give me more mermaids too.
Where's the demons? Where's the elves, dude? Like there's so many other different fucking disturbing creatures.
Did you say where's the
in
elves?
universe. Elves. Elves are
elves.
terrifying.
Elves. I thought I heard Alf.
I
too.
thought I heard elves.
Elves.
Someone
Elves.
passed me a notebook.
Oh my God, dude!
An
Alf
horror
eats
movie?
cats.
Yes.
Oh fuck yeah!
That,
Let's go right
that
Yes,
fucking alien
yes.
came to our universe to eat cats. Do you understand that? Like, that is a fucking horror show.
But cats were just the beginning.
All right, Owen. What's your trope you're tired of, don't want to write to, or would retire?
Okay, one thing I'd say as screenwriters and filmmakers, that when you find that trope, then twist it. Do something cool. Because this is where narrative exists.
Fuck it.
Narrative exists and fun exists between expectation and actuality. Like what we expect in what actually happens. That's why horror and narrative works. When we are expecting, I'm expecting my spouse to be faithful. I'm expecting the world to make sense. I'm expecting I'm a good person, that everything's going to go right. And then I come home to see my wife fucking my brother, right? And this has not happened. This has not happened. Yet. But that sort of a storyline is like, that makes a story. If I went home and found my wife and made dinner for me and we were going to, have roses and wine, then that would not be a story, right? So our expectations are now built of the tropes of our parents and grandparents. So we, as modern day filmmakers, need to make use of that expectations because we now know what we're expecting, so we can create the surprise by twisting that. That's a really fun opportunity. All our film watchers and readers are horror fans. So we know what they're expecting, make them surprised. And the one thing I would change is I don't want to kill dogs anymore.
Okay.
Tired of dogs dying.
Thank you.
I've done it, and I don't want to do it anymore.
All right.
Can we make a movie, like a horror movie about Care Bears? Like, I really want to see that. I don't know why.
If you can acquire that IP, yes.
Oh, thank God. We would do some kind of ripoff. So that's fine.
Juliet, what trope are you tired of? Would you retire?
I sort of agree that it's about subverting expectations. So I actually think any of the tropes is, if you're switching things up, that even a trope that you've seen a million times can be effective if something different is if then there's the twist that Owen's saying. So I agree with that.
Right on. Well, Ethereal Horror Fest, we're not done yet because we're going to wrap up this talk and then we are going to move into a screening of Juliet's film, A Place Among the Dead.
Yeah.
And then afterwards,
super excited.
Juliet's going to join us again. We're going to have a Q&A after the film. But in the meantime, you guys are great, and I appreciate you guys hanging out and asking some great questions. I would love it if you could make a lot of noise for Ron Huffstutter, and Owen Egerton and Juliet Landau.
Me Ron Huffington? Hold on.
Thank you, Ethereal Horror Fest. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. You got my Ron Huffstutter,
Huffstutter,
Tunnel
yeah.
13 Films. Jack